We'll now explore some of the premises of symbolic interactionism. The first one is that humans are unique in our ability to use symbols. Now, I think enough research has been done by biologists and other scientists, like primatologists, others, to show that there are certain animals that can use symbols, and we'll define what a symbol here is in a minute. So humans aren't unique in that we are exclusively use symbols where no other being does. That being said, the extent and the volume of symbols we use is unique. So certain animals can think symbolically, but their range in which they can think symbolically, their vocabulary, that's another way to think of this, is limited in comparison to humans. We think most of our thinking is done through symbols. So what is a symbol? A symbol is anything that you can use to convey a certain meaning or understanding to others. And we'll talk about this more in a minute. Virtually anything can be used as a symbol. It can be used to convey meaning. But here's an example of a symbol. We have this configuration of stars and stripes and different colors. And we know that this flag is symbolic. It's a symbol. It's supposed to refer to the United States of America. So if nothing else, it's supposed to refer to a certain geographic location. But we also know that other forms of meaning are often invested in this symbol, in that when this picture, this symbol refers to America, there's often other symbolic or meaningful connotations that go along with it. So some might see the American flag and think of America, but also think of the American dream, or they might have feelings of patriotism, right? We also know that in other parts of the world, in certain parts of the world, if someone sees the American flag, that they're not going to think, they're going to think bad things about what this is supposed to represent. They're not going to look upon, or they don't look upon America favorably. But here we see again that this pattern of stars and stripes is used to convey this idea of what America is and what America stands for. Now, where does meaning come from? Well, meaning does not inhere in kind of the object itself. It's not intrinsic to the actual thing. Instead, we give things meaning, which is another way of saying that we treat things as symbols. So there's nothing about this configuration of stars and stripes that would automatically and kind of reflexively, without us having to think, that would refer to America as a country or American ideals or anything like that. And we know this because we can look at something that's very similar to the American flag. But my guess is when many of us look at this, we see, or we can probably appreciate that it's a flag. So it's symbolic in that sense. So we can probably guess it's referring to a country. But we wouldn't understand what this flag is supposed to mean in any sort of meaningful way. Now, this is actually the Liberian flag and was modeled after the American flag. But unless we're familiar with Liberia and its history, this flag would not invoke any sort of the same emotions or understandings that this flag does, that the American flag does. Because there's no intrinsic meaning to this configuration, the Liberian configuration of stars and stripes, as opposed to the American configuration. We only know that these things have a certain meaning because we've learned them. And so humans have invested meaning onto these things. Which is another way of saying we don't just walk through the woods and trip over something and discover that it has meaning. The reason why it has meaning is because people have given certain things meaning in particular contexts. So another premise of symbolic interactionism is that people act on the basis of the meaning that things have for them. Or another way of saying this is how we define the situation. And here you should see influence of Weber when he talks about how sociology should concern itself with how others understand the world, and that people act on the basis of their understanding. Symbolic interactionism takes up this idea and kind of advances it in a certain way, and wants to say that most of human action is done on the basis of meaning. Now, there's certain things that we do. We might do things by routine, so we're not really thinking about them. We could be, say, just wake up. We just wake up, and we're still not fully aware of what's going on, and we're just doing things. So we can't do things maybe mindlessly. Sometimes we can go on autopilot. But most of what we do based on how we understand the situation that we're in. And so, example that I like to use to illustrate this point is that for a while I was part of this book club with a group of friends that I had. And one of the traditions that can develop within this group is that at some point during our book club discussion, people would refer to me as an idiot. They'd be like, well, Craig's an idiot. Okay. For the most part, if I was walking down the street and some stranger just walked up to me and said, hey, Craig, you're an idiot, or if most of my coworkers came up to me and said, hey, Craig, you're an idiot, I would be offended, or I'd be embarrassed, or I'd be ashamed. I'd have a negative reaction to that comment. However, in the context of book club and my friends saying this, I understood this was just kind of a little ritual we had, and that it was used more as terms of endearment than as opposed to a way to kind of degrade me and be derogatory. So even though objectively that phrase is meant to be insulting, in this context, I understood what that meant. Not in terms of literal translation of those words, but I understood it symbolically, and understood that I was not meant to take those words literally. And I understood, again, that this was part of us joking around and actually being a form of solidarity as opposed to an insult. Another premise, because meaning is not objective, it's not anchored in things, we don't stumble across it in the woods, we must actively interpret what meaning is. So one of symbolic interactionism's a hallmark of this is that it theorizes that us as actors do a lot of work in the world. We are very much actors. We are agents, as opposed to kind of passively operate in the world or being controlled by forces that are above and beyond us. And we can see this, that, again, we must actively interpret things, because the reality is lots of things are ambiguous. Lots of situations are ambiguous. And we need to, meaning that they can have multiple interpretations or understanding. And we need to figure out which one we are operating with and what the other person we're interacting with, what they're operating with. So, for example, Goffman, not in what we'll read, but in another book, has this passage where he contrasts holding hands versus hands being held, in that if you see two people holding hands, the question is, how should we understand that situation? Well, maybe in certain circumstances, if we see two individuals holding hands, that could be a symbol that this is a couple, so they're in a romantic relationship. But there are other times and places where people hold hands where there's a different meaning, and we understand it in very different terms. So you might know that, if you're an adult and you're interacting with small children, like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, you might walk and hold their hand, right? Even if they're not your child, maybe there's someone, niece or nephew or someone else that you're watching your friends' kids, all right? There you're holding hands, right? Hands are being held, but people don't understand this as expressing a romantic relationship. This is more of a parental or caretaking relationship. And so we understand holding hands differently in that situation. Similarly, if you see people holding hands, it could be that one person's getting a manicure, and so like we understand that again, when someone's hand is being held in that context, it's not symbolizing a romantic relationship. It's part of a job and a task that someone's performing. So hand holding is a very complex thing. It can mean multiple things. And in order for us to understand what the meaning of hand holding is, we have to do some work. We have to figure out which meaning we should attach to this situation. Another ambiguous situation is you are invited to dinner by someone, and you need to figure out whether is this a social invitation, right? An invitation that this person's having you over because you're friends, or is this a romantic overture, right? Is this a date or a dinner, right? And it can mean both of those things, and it's important to know which meaning, right, the person that's giving the invitation, which meaning they have, because again, they could approach the situation with very different understandings. And if you're not on the same page, like one person thinks this is a date, another person thinks it's dinner, again, kind of bad things could happen. People are often ironic in that they say one thing but actually mean the opposite. And this is an example of symbolic thinking, because what the person means is something different than what they're literally saying, right? And often it's the exact opposite. So often when the weather is terrible outside, people will say great weather today, right? Now, if you literally thought that this person, like if it's a miserable day outside and you literally thought this person was saying, oh, outside is great, you'd be like, this person is weird, right? They don't understand what's going on. There must be something wrong with this person. But if you understand, right, that they're using this phrase ironically, right, then you can attach a certain meaning to it that's different than their words. But then you realize this person is joking and they're pointing out how bad the weather is. A few years back, Sheryl Crow said, and I think this is a direct quote, "Nashville is a terrible place to live." And so if you just saw this in print, you might think she's trashing Nashville. But she was actually saying this in a joking way because she thinks Nashville is such a great place to live, and she loves living there, but she doesn't want a whole bunch of other people to move into the city and potentially ruin it. All right. So as a way to say like Nashville, to kind of protect what she sees as being Nashville and all its good elements, she said jokingly, "Oh, it's a terrible place to live. You would never want to live there." All right. Here we say people are using these phrases in a symbolic way. It's not supposed to refer to literally what the person says, but their meaning is different. In this case, generally the opposite. And this should be another assumption, so this should be bumped out here. Meaning is actually conferred by a self. And we'll see what Mead means by this more in the next lecture. But the point here is that